It's been a long time. I have to apologise. I had my last update on the 9th of August and I've had a lot going on since then, so my sincere apologies. I will be heading back to Tasmania soon, so I'm going to try and get this book read before I go back to Tasmania. So I'm going to start off, it's 1990, this is episode 14, and I'm going to start talking after each section because I find if I leave it to the end, I'm forgetting to talk about some stuff. And apologies for this grossness. I have spent the day at the hospital. So that's what happens when you've got a dicky ticker. But here we go. So 1990, Pagan. Pagan watched as several utility vehicles drove past her house, slowed down, and then parked on the nature strip next door. Placing the breakfast bowl on the coffee table, Pagan watched as three young, virile men jumped out of the utility and proceeded to open the locked gate to the vacant house. Excitement grew as she realised that the new neighbours had arrived. A sold sign had been placed on the realty advertisement, 2 weeks prior, and she had waited anxiously to see who had bought it. Fearful that they would be the next victims to be exposed to her family toxicity, she hoped that they would be active in their protests to live in a quiet neighbourhood, asserting their displeasure of late-night arguing. A small black cat parked next to the curb. Kane shook his head. A Porsche 944, and in this neighbourhood too. Pagan distanced herself from Kane by stepping closer to the curtains. She pulled the blinds up so she could have a better look at the driver of the lush car. A young woman stepped out of the Porsche. A short red dress showed off the young woman's muscly legs and small, delicate ankles. Her straight, short black hair sharply contoured her delicate neck, giving her an air of sophistication. Pagan felt instantly inferior. She doesn't look old enough to own a car like that. She's barely 20, Kane asserted. The woman lit a cigarette while she surveyed her new surroundings. With a flick of her hand, she ordered the men to unpack the utility. They obeyed. Unexpectedly, she turned towards Pagan as if she had known she was there all the time. Pagan jumped back, dropping to the floor. Looking up at Kane, Pagan noticed he had paled. Glaring back at the woman for several seconds, he walked off. Her heart was racing when she stood back up, peering out through the blinds again. Her eyes darted from the front lawn to the Porsche. She had obviously entered her new home. Another car pulled up beside the curb, parking directly behind the Porsche. Two more unusual looking women jumped out of the car. One woman looked like the first woman. The third woman was plain, and her movements were awkward, as if she wanted a car to lose control and hit her. Their ages were so close, Pagan wondered if they were triplets. Pagan tilted her head. Who were these women, and why would they live in Latrobe? Excited, she ran to Thomas's to tell him all about the mysterious women that had moved next door. Thomas sat engrossed in his PC game, remaining focused on the monitor even after Pagan slumped beside him. Pulling the chair up even closer, she actively invaded his personal space, promptly telling him about the new female neighbours, delving into exaggerated detail. Eyes darting across the computer screen, he still ignored her. Reaching out, Pagan turned the power switch off to his monitor. Hey, what did you do that for? Pagan smirked. Well, listen to me. Thomas sat back stiffly. Well, maybe the world doesn't revolve around you, Pagan. Offended, Pagan remained silent while she selected her options of retaliation. Thomas had distanced himself from her over the last 6 months, and although she had brought up the awkwardness, he had remained adamant that nothing had changed. Broaching the subject with her mother, she had responded steadfastly that it was most likely due to male hormones. They use hormones against us, but men have hormones as well, although they never talk about it. Not that I would use it against them as an excuse for their behaviours, Aislinn had snarled. Thomas interrupted. Look, Pagan, Dad is taking me on holidays again. Pagan sat up as the pit of her stomach twisted. In one moment, her happiness had turned to despair. Thomas was still her only friend. When and for how long? Anticipating a tantrum, he inhaled, "For 1 year, we leave on Monday." Pagan stood up, pacing around his immaculate bedroom. Her blood heated, but she felt cold. 1 year? Where's he taking you this time? And what's so important that he has to go for a fucking year? Crossing his arms, Thomas replied, "It doesn't matter, Pagan, does it? Plus, I'm not sure where we're going. I just do as I'm told." Pagan stood up. "Well, it matters to me." Sadness turning into rage, she walked to the door, slamming the door shut. She sarcastically yelled at Thomas to have fun on your holiday. Flicking the monitor back on, he released a nervous laugh. It had always amused him when he witnessed one of Pagan's explosive moments. She really was predictable. I'm not really sure I need to say anything about that chapter. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, Pagan is intensely lonely, and Thomas seems like he's had Jack over. He's a bit over the neediness, probably. And it's been a long time, but at one stage, people were saying to me a lot, "It's not all about you, Joe." And I obviously made everything about me at some stage, and that is a bad trait. And I'm not really sure why I made it all about me, and and I'm glad I'm not doing that anymore. So, chapter 10, Pagan. With Thomas gone, Norman vanished, and Inanna now moved out. Pagan found herself fastened to the chair in front of her lounge room window, surveying the mysterious neighbours for hours each day. It had become an obsession. They rarely left their house in the daylight, limiting their interactions with the locals, preferring to spend most nights hosting noisy parties for an abundance of out-of-town visitors, usually wrapping it up at sunrise. The irony amused Pagan, who thought it was karma that their music drowned out her parents arguing, and infuriated Cain on nights he passed out early, only to wake to the thumping of the bass. She wondered if God, if there was one, had organised the strange neighbours to move in next door, because he too could hear Cain and Aislinn arguing in heaven. Not that Pagan registered the arguing anymore. Somehow her brain had learned to shut it out. What intrigued Pagan was how the guests were getting to these parties. There was never any extra cars, buses, motorbikes or push bikes to transport them, and they seemed to simply disappear the next morning. One night she had jumped the side fence and crept up to the window. Luckily there had been a slight gap in the curtain and she could easily see inside. There appeared to be hundreds of people squeezed into a small living area. Strange-looking people who had all danced as if someone had used a remote control and pressed half speed. On several occasions, Pagan had caught the eldest woman staring at her as she walked to school in the mornings. Too scared to make eye contact, Pagan stared at the footpath as she walked past. Witnessing a group of Jehovah's Witnesses walking up to their front door one morning at 9 a.m. Suitcases, pamphlets and children in tow, only to leave stumbling over themselves as they scrambled out the gate, only increased Pagan's interest in them. What strange women. Her mother asked, talking to yourself again, Pagan? Pagan nodded, "Well, I don't have anyone else to talk to." Handing Pagan her lunch, Aislinn stared out the window. "I hope you're not thinking of bonding with those weirdos next door. They are rather scandalous. The whole town is talking about them." Pagan snarled, "Talking behind their backs, you mean?" Aislinn ignored her daughter's sarcasm. "It's too nice a day to be locked inside. After you've finished your lunch, you should go outside and play." "Mum, I'm 14. I don't play." Aislinn walked towards the kitchen. "Well, do something productive then, like homework." "How about you get a life?" Pagan said underneath her breath, missing the irony of her own pathetic life. If Pagan was honest, she enjoyed watching the neighbours as they offered an alternative lifestyle compared to her mother's mundane existence, and a liberation she had not known existed. She promised herself that when she left home, she would just be like them. Turning to look at her mother, who was already fussing over the dishes, Pagan knew that being like her mother was not an option. 10 hours later, another argument. penetrated the walls of her bedroom. Pagan stared at the mess of papers and books spread out over her bed and wondered if she should just retire for the night and wake early in the morning to finish her essay. Aislinn and Cain's voice suddenly increased in volume as they entered the hallway. Rolling her eyes, Pagan anticipated that Aislinn was leaving Cain again and was heading to her bedroom to pack. But surprisingly, Aislinn rushed through Pagan's door, slamming it shut behind her. Within seconds, Cain attempted to open the door, and with the door now ajar, a struggle between her parents began. Aislinn's only advantage was Cain's weakness due to intoxication. Pagan was wild with rage. How dare they invade her space? They had the entire house to fight in. Cain quickly fatigued, and with the last amount of energy, he smashed his fist through the door, only to return to the lounge room to pass out. Aislinn had screamed as Cain's fist missed her face by only a few inches, but she held fast on her side of the door. "Pack your bags, we're leaving," Aislinn screamed. Although she wanted to escape from this life, Pagan hadn't wanted to take her mother with her, and in that moment of potential escape, she strangely felt a loyalty to the only home she had ever known. Aislinn repeated herself. This time a growl exited her throat as well. Pagan quickly start packing. Pagan jumped off the bed and without warning slapped her mother across the face. "You make me sick." Pagan, "You make me sick." Bursting into tears, Aislinn collapsed onto the floor. A rage burned inside Pagan. "When are we going to stop this? You do this every week. You're pathetic. Do you think he cares? He knows you'll return tomorrow. You're too weak to survive on your own. You're too weak to be a mother." As if a cold wind entered the room, Pagan fled from the house. Running down the street, adrenaline and guilt led the way. Fear navigated her to the church where her parents had married. She collapsed onto the cold stone steps. Gulping for air, Pagan considered running away for good. But where would she go? How would she survive? What about school? Could she find Norman? What would Anana take her in? Erratic thoughts inside her head were made worse by the silence of the town. It was as if the whole world was asleep. She was very alone. Curled up on the steps, sheltered by the church's alcove entrance, sleep soon quietened her thoughts. Waking an hour later, memories of the evening flooded her thoughts. Pagan. She stood up, panicked because the voice came from somewhere inside of her brain. Bravely, she stepped out of the alcove and into the church's car park, expecting a man to be standing there, but she was surprised to see only the stillness of the night. Who said that? Am I losing my mind? She thought. I wouldn't listen to him if I were you. God tends to be a little dramatic at times like this, and you can really never tell if it's him or the darkness. Both enjoy a joke, said Pagan's mysterious female neighbour. So that's close to home, that little section. That is very close to what actually happened. I got to that stage where I felt that way towards my mum. It was like she would leave, she would come back, he would promise the world, nothing changed, and they continued on. It was probably one of the hardest things to deal with my childhood, was the fact that there was never resolution. It was just a continuation of a pattern. And you know what? In hindsight now, I can see that both of them were unaware of their own patterns as well. I'm just going to quickly go back because I think there was something else I wanted to talk about. I love my humour when it comes to the fact that someone noisier moves in next door to annoy Cain. It never happened in real life, but that's my irony of that kind of thing going on with that. And of course, as a female, seeing three very independent, non-caring, liberated women move next door would be intoxicating to Pagan, who is sensing that normality isn't for her anyway. And I felt very much that way when I was a kid. And it's interesting now, the friends and friendships that I still have, 25 years later after leaving high school, and how much we've all evolved and how much we had similar childhoods, or how much we questioned things and how much our supernatural interests are there. And it's really, really interesting to see that years later, because we have changed as people. There was something else I wanted to talk about, but buggered if I can remember what it was. So I'll just have to leave it there for a second. Right, I just reread that because I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything. So one of the things that I noticed, I had a friend who used to argue with her husband quite a lot, and I used to notice that her child used to just ignore the arguing. It was like she would just zone out, and it was really confronting to me to see that, because it's a terrible realization when your children are so used to the arguing, or their coping mechanism is to completely shut down. It's a really sad thing, but I think it's a safety thing. I think it's a security thing for the child to cope with it. And then there was another thing, and I apologize if I've already spoken about this because I feel like I might have, but there's, you know, when Pagan hears what she thinks is God inside her head at the church, that is also a true story from me. I was walking down what we call the back track in Tasmania. Oh, actually, it was a little bit further up. It was actually at the back of the doctor's surgery, so my apologies for that. But the only time in my entire life that I have heard a voice deep within my head, it was right inside, it felt like it was right inside my brain going outways, and it just said Joe. So I really do feel like I've spoken about this, so I've popped it into here. Now, lucky I told my mum about it, but I'm lucky she wasn't one of these parents who's like, right, my daughter has schizophrenia. Like, we need to take her to because I would have been medicated. Like, I would have been medicated, particularly because I was a super anxious child. I had social anxieties. I was weird. I felt like a weird kid. There were many things that if I didn't have the parents, now it's either neglect, that my parents went, she'll grow out of it. But I know Mum used to treat me special, and I don't think she thought I was special. I think she thought I needed the extra attention because I was a bit weird. But I've been talking to friends about this. Like, if this had been now, if I was a child now, I'd be medicated. And I wouldn't have learned how to be socially acceptable. I wouldn't have learned those cues, because I would have went, right, well, something's wrong with me and I have to take medication. So I'm really grateful, because I'm I try not to take any medication at any time. Now, yesterday I had Aspro for my heart to stop the pain. I'm not silly. Sometimes I will take pain. I will have the pain relief, thank you very much. But I do try to avoid medications of all types. So I'm thankful that my mum and dad didn't decide that I had to, be taken off to the doctor. And my mum did love Dr. Lane, by the way. So Dr. Lane, he was a very modern thinking doctor. He was very much about herbs and vitamins, rather than what's in your food, rather than popping anyone onto medication, which is quite amazing. And also a little dig is in there about people talking behind people's back. I don't know if it's a Western thing, but I know it's certainly a Tasmanian thing. I mean, we all talk about it. No one's going to be surprised that I say this. I have a German friend who said that I was really refreshing because I speak my mind as much as I possibly can to your face. If I'm displeased, I will tell you. And she said, in Europe, people just say it how it is. She said, so she's trying to learn the social cues in Tasmania, because, the females seem really lovely to her face, and then she hears that these people are bitching behind her back, and that's something unusual to her. So let's hope Tasmania starts to stop doing that. I mean, years later, I feel like it still happens, but I do feel like we are speaking our mind a little bit more now. Rightio, let's go to the next section, Pagan. Slinking one body length behind her nighttime saviour, they journeyed quickly through the township. Their ears were acutely aware to their surroundings, haunting cow cries from the dairy paddocks only a kilometre behind them, trucks' engines juddering through their gears at the highway roundabout, and municipality dogs alerting their slumbering owners with rubber spine barking that danger lingered nearby. The town was alive with noise, whereas only moments earlier the world had been silent. Pagan swallowed her breath, only as far down at the bottom of her rib cage. She took another half breath to fill the void. Questioning the sudden appearance of this woman at the church and her Mary Magdalene hospitality, Pagan's thoughts fought an uncouthly skepticism where she attempted to settle on a rational resolution, finally deciding that she had no other choice but to follow this woman and trust her. Aislinn had warned her daughter against ignoring gut feelings, a feeling that was, at this time, highly suspicious of this woman, a woman who her mother had warned her about. Pagan considered if her mother's fears were warranted. She stared at the woman. After some thought, she concluded that her mother was most likely jealous of her. Honouring a controlled sexual competence and mental astuteness, emotional stiffness, and an unsympathetic chin, she was the scariest woman Pagan had ever met and the most intriguing. Her mother, who frequently switched off Madonna's sexually progressive music film clips, because she believed they pushed back women's liberation by 50 years, amused Pagan. She measured the distribution of liberation between the two women, Madonna versing her mother, easily favouring the American pop singer. Her mother had no idea about women's liberation. The neighbour who Pagan had been stalking for months and now was the person who came to Pagan's rescue, introduced herself as Emily. Not offering an explanation to how she had found Pagan or why, Emily kindly offered refuge for the night. Balking at first while her intuition quarrelled with curiosity, Pagan finally agreed to stay with her, mainly due to a chill that had settled in her bones and that there was no way she was going back until the next morning when Cain had left for work. It would be hard enough facing her mother, let alone him as well. The full moon does strange things to people, makes them do things they normally wouldn't, Emily calmly stated. Pagan had not noticed the moon glistening to the right of them until Emily mentioned it, commanding and beautiful. The full moon had guided Pagan to the church, and without pride or ego, the moon had not asked for gratification. A flawless night, Pagan predicted a vanilla sunrise followed by severe frost in the morning. For most of the walk, Emily remained silent. Only the sound of her high heels clanking on the road and the squeak of her leather trousers rubbing together at the top of her thighs made her existence real. Pagan snuck another look at Emily. She looked grand wearing a large fur coat. Pagan shivered from envy. Maybe next time she ran away, she would wear appropriate clothing. Okay, I've got to write that one down. Emily laughed. Don't worry, it's not real. I know how much you would hate that. What a strange thing to say, Pagan thought. Emily had spoken several times in the last 15 minutes as if she was familiar with Pagan's character. Had Emily been stalking her as well? Relieved and scared, Pagan entered Emily's home. The smell of patchouli instantly consumed her nostrils while the wood heater warmed her skin. Grabbing Pagan's hand, Emily led her through the drunken visitors to the hallway. Another turn and they were in Emily's bedroom. She shut the door to block some of the sound out. Welcome to my boudoir. 3 walls were painted blood clot red, while the 4th had been turned into a wardrobe without doors. Pagan had never seen so many clothes of all tastes and fabrics squashing into the claustrophobic manifestation. Running her fingertips along the fabric with a sensory delight, silk, sequin, cashmere, woolen knit and tweed. You must be rich to be able to afford all these clothes. Emily pulled out an orange Angora cardigan and passed it to her. Here, put this on. Pagan obeyed, instantly feeling warmer as she pulled it over her head. She sensed Emily was annoyed that she had not unbuttoned the cardigan instead. Emily pointed to the bed. Please sit. Obediently, Pagan sank into the waterbed, which took up most of the space in the bedroom. Made from hardwood, the four corners of the bed supported a canopy that looked like string toffee that had been thrown to the opposite corner of the bed, creating a web cathedral pattern. Pagan had never seen a bed like it before. Two bedside lamps sat on either side of the bed, just close enough for Amy to stretch her hand out and turn them on. Pagan was in awe of the lamps. Four brass coiled snakes twisting up towards the ceiling. Twisted light bulbs were positioned in the snake's mouth. Pagan touched one of the lamps as if its base switching it on. She jumped from surprise. They're exquisite, aren't they? I had them especially made after I turned 18. They remind me of a good friend, someone I haven't seen for a long time, but she'll be back with me one day. Until then, those gorgeous lamps remind me of her. Why snakes? Snakes are terrible things. Lost somewhere in an intimate memory, only privy to Amelie, Pagan witnessed for the first time compassion in her neighbour's eyes. Anyway, Amelie said. Amelie continued, yes, I am wealthy. Not that it will last forever. A twist of fate saw my family lose almost all of its possessions, but my mother was savvy enough to stash some of it away before they confiscated it. Who confiscated it? It's a boring story, really, and we have a party to attend to. There were at least 50 people lounging around the house, lazing on the couch, kissing against the wall, playing backgammon at the coffee table, playing strip poker on the floor where they all appeared to be losing, and lying on the beach bags in a sitting circle, touching palms as if they were transporting information from one person to another like a game of Chinese whispers. Leaning against the wall, waiting for Amy to return to her side, Pagan curiously studied the guests. They had all a certain knowing about them that unnerved Pagan, as if they all understood a riddle she was yet to hear. A man only dressed in baby blue corduroy overalls with hair like straw, danced over to the stereo system, turning the techno music up. The progressive beat of the music hyped a few of the guests, who jumped up from their seats and proceeded to dance haphazardly around the lounge room. Fortunately, Pagan did not recognise any of the guests in Amelie's home and found a certain fascination staring at them. A feeling of awe consumed her. She was pleased none of them knew her, as she did not want anyone titter-tattering back to her parents. But their complete refutation of her existence made her feel invisible and unimportant, especially since she desperately wanted to fit in for the evening. Much to Pagan's relief, Amelie appeared and pushed her into the kitchen, where she fixed an alcoholic cocktail, one for herself and one for her underage guest. Slopping the green concoction over the kitchen counter, she ignored the mess and handed Pagan her glass. Drink, this will warm you up. The drunk burned Pagan's throat, and she felt drunk even before the liquid touched her stomach or reached her stomach. I made it strong so your toes will sweat. We don't want you catching a cold after sleeping in the elements this evening. Braver this time, Pagan took another larger gulp. The alcohol felt as if she had burst into flames when it reached her chest. Bubbling like lava in her stomach, she thought she would combust, only smoking ashes left of her in the morning. Now stick out your tongue and let me pop some happy acid on it. This stuff will blow your mind. Obediently, she pushed her tongue out as far as she could. Amelie placed a small piece of paper into her bile-coated tongue. Let it dissolve, just go with it. I'm here, so you're safe, and I promise it will take you to your subconscious quicker than any shrink, sweetheart. Let's see what you've learned this lifetime. It tasted bitter, metallic even. Pagan clenched her teeth. Dizzy, she closed her eyes, only to open them again as she felt unstable. The dimensions of Amy's face changed before her, shrinking and moving unnaturally like a Picasso painting in a washing machine cycle. Heart racing and an overload of sensory surplus, Pagan grabbed Amy's hand and squeezed. How long does this last? Let's go, Pagan, don't fight it. Let go, Pagan, don't fight it. Enjoy the ride. Some things you can't control, honey, just flow. Closing her eyes again, Pagan concentrated on the voices in the kitchen and dining room. An orchestra of conversation rolled like the tide, ebbing and flowing, making her nauseated. She opened her eyes. I don't like it. I want it to stop. Amy leaned in, almost until their cheeks kissed. Make what stop, Pagan? This life, I don't like it. Interesting. It's like, how much do I tell you about, my experience on an acid trip. I went to a festival and I did acid and had a really good night. It's a bad story because I don't want you running off and doing acid. But the next morning it was really interesting because everyone was like, hey Joe, and I was like, interesting, everybody knows me this morning. Now in my mind, I had just danced all night. And not only, like in the movies when you dance and everyone steps to the side and just watches you, like I had that kind of fantasy, I think. And I thought, but then in the morning everyone was calling me like Dancing Joe, so I don't know if that actually happened. Like it could have actually happened for real. Appropriate clothing. So the person obviously that Emily is based on, she does have the most amazing clothes and like just the most beautiful, good quality clothes, and she looks after them immaculately. Like it's something really special to her that she does that. So I had to put that in as well. So we now know that Emily moved in next door. So Pagan's best friend, obviously Pagan doesn't know she's a witch yet. She doesn't understand anything. She's not been, awakened. So, but Emily has, so Emily's waiting for her. Obviously, the lamps are to do with Pagan, and you'll get to know what that means a little bit later.